A young white girl was left strung up beneath a timber gate, a crude sign reading Indian land painted in dripping red beside her, until a lone Comanche stepped forward and altered the course of everything that followed. On the fringes of the Rosewood settlement, in the northern plains, late summer of 1873, the wind carried the bitter scent of scorched wood and spilled blood. Smoke still rose and frail, silver tendrils from the burned-out husks of cabins, curling lazily through broken fences and whispering through fields of blackened corn. The birds had fallen silent. Even the sky, burdened with ash and grief, turned away. At the heart of what had once been a hopeful frontier village stood a charred timber gate, its presence once a marker of ambition, now a monument of violence. Hanging from the crossbeam was Clara May, 19 years old, her limp figure silhouetted against the dying light. Her arms were bound tightly above her head with rough, splintering rope, her temples streaked with dried blood that had trailed down to her collarbone and cracked in the heat. Her boots were gone. The hem of her sky-blue dress was torn and smeared with soot. Her chin slumped against her chest, and though she looked lifeless, the faint rise and fall of her breath betrayed the fragile thread by which she still clung to life. Next to her, nailed crudely into the wood, the message was unmistakable: Indian land. A small group of warriors lingered nearby, their horses grazing on dry tuft of grass that pushed through the soot. One of the older warriors, thick-set and draped in war paint, turned to another figure beside the gate. "Let them all see," he said bitterly, "what comes of taking our land." A younger warrior shifted uneasily. "She's just a girl." She wore the settler's dress, came to reply, flat and unyielding. "She pays the settler's price." But then a third man stepped forward. He was lean and quiet, his dark hair tied with a faded strip of red cloth. His name was Tyan. Though his blood was Comanche, the fire that burned in the others did not live in his eyes. He looked up at the girl. Her lips were split, flies gathered near her wounds, but she was still alive, barely. "Then I'll pay my price too," he said. The others turned toward him. "What are you doing, Comanche?" someone asked. Tyan's voice remained calm. "She breathes. She bleeds. She's still human." Without waiting for permission, he stepped forward, drew a clean, well-kept knife from his belt, and began climbing the timber frame. The beam groaned beneath his weight. Ash drifted from the wood with every movement. "Touch that rope," one of them warned, "and you sever your place in the circle." Tyan didn't answer. He reached the crossbeam, where sunlight touched the girl's bruised face. One eyelid fluttered open. Then, with a swift motion, he cut the rope. Clara fell forward into his arms, feather-light and limp. He descended slowly, her body cradled against his chest like a wounded fawn. Above them, the painted sign flapped once in the wind, then fell still. No one stopped him. The warriors turned away, muttering. One spat in the dust. Tyan walked through the remnants of the village, stepping carefully over burnt rafters and shattered glass until the last ruined home lay behind him. He found his horse tethered near a broken well. Clara, unconscious, was laid gently into the saddle's bedroll. He mounted, turning the horse eastward. Behind them, the silence pressed heavy. As they rode, Clara stirred. Her breath came as a moan, dry and ragged. She tried to sit up, but collapsed. "Let me go," she croaked. Tyan said nothing. When she opened her eyes and saw his face, his skin, his feathers, the unfamiliar features, panic flared. She threw herself from the horse, crashing to the ground. Bruised and disoriented, she began to crawl away, dragging her battered limbs toward the tree-lean. Tyan dismounted. She turned, rasping, "No, don't." She grabbed a stone, swung, missed. Her voice cracked open, raw and unfiltered. "Just kill me. You savages already took everything." Her voice trembled. Her body shook. Then she collapsed entirely. The stone rolled from her grip. Tyan knelt beside her. Gently, he brushed the dirt from her cheek. He did not see her as an enemy, nor even as a casualty of war, but as something fragile, something human. Too human to be left strung up like a message. He lifted her once more, speaking quietly. "You are not dead yet," he said, and he carried her into the trees. The stream whispered low as it flowed through the pines, reflecting what little light filtered through the smoky sky. Beyond it, hidden beneath a ridge and wrapped in thickets of brush, stood a forgotten shelter, weathered timbers gray by time, the roof patched with bark and mud, a place no one claimed anymore. It was there that Tyann took her. Clara stirred only once during the ride, her head lolling against the saddle, lips parched with thirst and sun. Tyann spoke no words. He lifted her once again and carried her inside, laying her gently on a bed woven from grass. Dust swirled in the low light. The shelter smelled of damp earth, rotting moss, and old wood soaked too long by rain. Tyann crouched beside the cold hearth, struck flint, and coaxed a fire to life. The flames flickered slowly, casting long shadows that reached toward the corners of the hut. He poured water from his canteen into a shallow bowl, soaked a strip of cloth, and gently pressed it to the girl's brow. Her skin was hot, not from fever, but the lingering sting of pain and fear. By the time Clara woke, dusk had faded into full night. Her breath hitched. She screamed, raw, sharp, like a blade drawn fast. "Get away from me," she shouted. Her voice cracked, but still carried enough edge to pierce the quiet. She dragged herself backward, gasping as pain shot through her ribs. Her legs fumbled beneath her, ankles weak and limbs bruised. Tyann didn't move toward her. He simply set the wet cloth beside her on the packed dirt floor, then turned and stepped outside, settling near the fire. He left the doorway open behind him, letting her breathe. That night, neither of them slept. She sat curled in a corner, shoulders pressed to the wall, flinching at every creak in the wood. He sat by the fire, eyes on the flames, silent. By morning, Clara had tried to run. She limped down the hill, dragging herself past low stones and brambles into the edge of the trees. But her ankle buckled, and she collapsed. When she woke, her face was pressed into a bed of pine needles. Her dress was snagged on a thorn bush, her arms too weak to lift her body. Tyann appeared without a sound. She heard nothing until he was beside her, crouched low, eyes calm. "Don't touch me," she rasped, voice brittle. He didn't. He waited, not as if granting her permission, but as though he knew the pain would make her decision for her. When she could no longer breathe, without gasping, she turned her face away. Then he lifted her, gently, as if she might splinter, and carried her back. He didn't speak. He didn't scold. The second escape came at dusk. She slipped from the shelter and crawled toward the creek. She didn't make it. He found her slumped in the mud, limbs tangled in the reeds. The third time, she didn't run. When she opened her eyes and saw herself wrapped in a blanket again, something inside her broke. Anger surfaced, bitter and hard. She pushed the blanket off and stared at him. "Why don't you kill me like the others?" Tyann sat across the room, legs folded, palms resting open on his knees. "I didn't burn your home," he said quietly. "But I saw who did." Her breath came sharp and shallow. "My people," he continued, "Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, they did this. I won't lie." Her lip trembled. He watched her closely. "If they took a home from you," he said, "then I'll give one back." She flinched, unsure whether it was kindness or another cage. He stood, slowly, and left without waiting for an answer. Later, the scent of smoke drifted into the shelter, not fire, but broth, warm and spiced. He returned carrying a clay bowl, steam rising from its rim. Clara sat against the wall, her posture tense, her wrists swollen and fingers stiff. She looked at him warily. He knelt beside her and offered the bowl. She didn't take it. Her hand couldn't close. Tyann saw, without a word. He dipped the spoon into the broth, blew gently to cool it, and held it near her mouth. She hesitated. Then, finally, she parted her lips. The first spoonful caught in her throat. The second went down easier. She coughed once, then drank again. She watched him as he fed her, not as a threat, not as a stranger, not even as a man from the other side. He met her gaze without heat, without apology, only calm. She gave a slight nod. Her fingers curled faintly around the blanket. Outside, the pines rustled in the wind. Inside, for the first time since the fires, Clara closed her eyes. Not from fear, but from something warmer, something like comfort. Not safety, but its shape. Days passed slowly beneath the ridge, measured not by clocks, but by the slant of sunlight slipping through the seams in the wall. Clara's body mended piece by piece, bruises yellowing, cuts fading into fine pink threads, but trust was slower. It came in glances, in silences. She still jumped when branches cracked outside, still tense when Tyen moved too fast. He moved with quiet purpose. Barefoot on the shelter's floor, his steps made no sound. He never raised his voice. When he spoke, it was brief, words chosen carefully in her language. Eat, he'd say each morning, placing warm bread on a cloth. Water, when he returned from the stream, shoulders glistening from effort. One afternoon, thunder rumbled in the distance. Clara froze, curling into herself. Tyen knelt beside her and placed a hand on the ground. Safe, he said gently. Not war. She looked at him, unsure, but part of her wanted to believe. He didn't press, didn't try to fill the silence. Each morning, she found something near the door, a strip of smoked meat, a clutch of berries, a square of cornbread wrapped in cloth. She never saw him leave them, but they were always there, like gifts or quiet truths. He slept near the hearth. She slept by the wall. The space between them was not enforced. It was chosen. Then one morning, mist tangled between the trees, and the air smelled faintly of ash. Clara stepped out into the clearing and saw him. Tyen sat on a flat stone, bent over a block of wood no larger than a loaf of bread. His knife moved slowly, not cutting, but shaping. She watched him in silence, arms folded tightly across her chest, shielding herself from the mountain cold that had crept into her bones. The morning mist had burned off, but the wind still bit, and the trees swayed with the kind of hush that made the world feel paused. Later that afternoon, while Tyen was away gathering water from the stream, Clara stepped cautiously toward the flat stone where he had sat that morning. Something small rested there, left behind, unfinished. She knelt, her knees pressing into the cool earth, and stared. It was a carving, simple, rough-hewn, but alive. A bird or something becoming one. Its wings stretched halfway open, curved in motion, as though caught in the moment between stillness and flight. The grain of the wood guided the shape, not polished, not perfect, but full of quiet breath. She reached out and traced a finger along the wing. The edges were jagged, the tail unfinished. Her thumb paused over a notch where the carving had stopped. That evening, when he returned and found her sitting by the fire, the small wooden bird resting in her lap, she didn't try to hide it. Her fingers curled loosely around it, and she looked up at him as he stepped into the firelight. "If you carve me wings," she said softly, her voice steady, "I'll try to fly." He didn't answer, not with words. But something in his expression, something behind the stillness, shifted. Not a smile, not exactly. More like the first sign of thaw on frozen ground. The next morning, Clara rose before the sun had climbed the ridge. Her ankles still ached, and her limbs felt heavy with stiffness. But she followed him into the woods when he went to gather kindling. She fumbled at first, dropping more than she carried, her fingers clumsy, but she managed to gather a modest bundle and bring it back to the lodge. She sat down by the wall and caught her breath, half expecting him to comment. He said nothing, but he watched. That evening, she stirred the stew while he chopped roots by the door. The smell of simmering broth filled the shelter, rich, earthy, tinged with wild onion. The moment felt so ordinary, almost startled her. Then she spilled the salt. It hissed against the pot, and she muttered a sharp curse under her breath. Tyen paused, lifted one brow, and said dryly, "Bad magic." She blinked, and then, without warning, laughed. A short, startled sound that escaped her chest before she could stop it. The laughter surprised her more than the words. Tyen tilted his head slightly, a flicker of something touching the corners of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough to feel like one. They ate by the fire that night, bowls warm in their hands, shoulders close, but not touching. The flames painted their faces in gold and shadow. Steam curled from the stew, rising between them like a shared breath. They didn't speak much, but something moved in the space between silence, something soft and human. When she burned her tongue, he passed her a cool cup of water, the gesture quiet, almost amused. When he forgot to stir and the stew stuck to the pot, she sniffed it and muttered, "Tastes like revenge." He chuckled, low, rough, like a voice and used a laughter. Later, as they scrubbed the bowls with handfuls of moss and creek water, she looked over at him and asked, "Why do you stay here? Alone?" He paused, letting the question sit. Then, "Too many graves." He hesitated. "Not mine." She didn't press him further. She only nodded. It was enough. That night, Clara lay on her bed of woven reeds and fur. The fire burned low, casting soft flickers along the walls. Her eyes drifted to the wooden shelf across the room, where the bird rested, its wings still half-shaped, still trying. It wasn't beautiful. Not yet, but it made her chest ache. Not with sorrow, but with something quieter, heavier. Something like possibility. She didn't love him. Not yet, and he never asked her to. But for the first time since smoke had blackened the sky and fire had taken her world, she felt less like a ghost. One sat beside a fire, sharing stew with a stranger who no longer felt like one. In the silence between them, a small flame sparked, not wild, not bright, but steady, warm enough to stay. The cold came early that week, sweeping down from the hills like a warning. Inside the lodge, the fire crackled low, breathing pine resin and slow-cooked broth into the still air. Outside, trees swayed beneath the weight of wind, their branches creaking like old bones, reaching for something they could no longer hold. Clara sat near the hearth, knees drawn beneath the hide blanket Tyan had patched the day before. Her fingers toyed with the edge of the fabric, not from cold, but from the silence between them. Tyan sat nearby, his knife whispering against wood, the shape of the bird growing beneath his hands. The carving had changed. Its feathers held more confidence now. The wings were open, no longer hesitant. Clara watched it come alive. Then, after a long pause, her voice, quiet, cracked, and dry, broke the stillness. "They killed my parents," she said, eyes still fixed on the fire. "Not in a fight. Not like soldiers. They just came in the door. My father was at the stove. They shot him in the back." Tyan didn't move. "My mother screamed," Clara continued. "They dragged her outside and slit her throat. My sister tried to run. She was 14. They caught her. Her hands twisted in her lap. I don't know if she's alive. I don't know." The fire popped sharply, spitting sparks into the dimness. Still, Tyan said nothing. He listened. "I hid in the root cellar," Clara said. Her voice had steadied now, grim and clear. "I watched through a crack in the floorboards. I saw them burn the Thompsons alive. Their cabin lit up like a lantern. Mr. Thompson tried to shield the baby with his coat, but it didn't matter. They all burned." She turned to him then, her face unreadable, but her eyes glowing with something deeper than grief, deeper even than rage. "They painted the doors with blood," she whispered. "I can't forget the smell." Tyan slowly laid the carving aside. His voice, when it came, was low, like snow giving way beneath weight. "I wasn't there," he said, "but my people were." Clara's shoulders stiffened. She said nothing. "I was taken by the Comanche when I was 5. Tyan said after a long silence. "My real parents? I don't remember them. Just fire, screaming, and then nothing." His gaze lifted to the beams above, tracing invisible lines in the roof. "A woman raised me. In the tribe. She had no sons. I became hers." "But you weren't one of them," Clara said. "Not really," he replied. "Too light-skinned. Hair not dark enough. Eyes like a coyote," they said. "I learned to fight, to ride, but I was always different." She tilted her head slightly. "Why did they keep you?" Tyan gave a hollow smile. "Because I survived. That made me useful." Clara nodded slowly, then looked back at the fire. The next question came softer, almost hesitant. "And why did you help me?" He looked at her, not evasive, not guarded, but honest, his gaze steady. "Because if someone had helped me," he said, "maybe I wouldn't be so good at being alone." The words sat between them like a small offering, unwrapped, no weight of expectation, just truth. Clara lowered her gaze to her hands, still clutching the high blanket. Her chest ached, not with fear, not with grief, but with something unfamiliar. Recognition. They had not shared the same path, not the same blood, but pain had carved the same lines across both their hearts. Without a word, Clara rose. She crossed the lodge and knelt beside the stack of supplies Tyan had gathered in recent weeks. Scraps of leather, sinew, cloth worn soft by weather and time. Her fingers moved slowly as she chose a square of hide and returned to the fire. She threaded a needle, hands unsteady from the ache still lingering in her healing wrist. But she worked anyway. Small, clumsy stitches along the edge of the cloth. Not graceful, not even, but steady. When she finished the border, she looked up. "I never sewed anything before," she said. "My mother did, but I was always too clumsy." Tyan's expression softened. He gave a small shrug, as if to say, "And yet, here it is. This is an exquisite and powerful continuation." The pacing, emotional clarity, and balance between quiet tenderness and brutal interruption are all deeply affecting. I refined the language slightly for rhythm, clarity, and emotional tone while preserving your intent and style. Then, without explanation, Clara took the needle again and stitched one last word into the corner of the cloth in blocky, uneven letters. Teen. She held it out to him. He didn't take it first, just stared at it as if unsure whether to feel honored or ashamed. "It's not much," Clara said quietly, "but it's the first thing I made that wasn't for survival." At last, he reached forward and took it, folded it carefully like it was fragile. Then, for the first time since the night he had cut her down from the tree, he spoke her name. The morning was still, the kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. Fog hung low through the trees, muffling the wind and bird calls. Tyan had gone early to check the snares near the ravine. Clara sat by the fire, grinding acorns, humming an oldham without words. For a moment, it felt like the war was far away, soft at first, just murmurs in the ground. But Tyan felt them before she did. He stopped, muscles tense, head turning toward the east. Clara stepped outside, basket in hand, and saw the way he stared into the fog. "What is it?" she asked. Then they emerged. Figures through the mist, bare-chested, painted, armed. Comanche warriors. His people, 6 of them. Bone necklaces, leather fringe, blood-colored paint slashed across their faces. The leader stepped forward, eyes locked on Tyan. "You are not forgotten," he said in Comanche. "Nor forgiven." Tyan stood his ground. "I left war behind," he replied. "You brought it with you." The man sneered, eyes flicking toward Clara. "You hide what we marked." She was left to burn. "You sheltered her." Another warrior stepped forward, anger boiling in his voice. "She is the stain that says we didn't finish. The others will forget. The line must hold." Tyan moved in front of Clara. "You will not touch her." There was no warning. One lunge, grabbing Tyan's shoulder. He shoved it off. The fight exploded. Fists, elbows, the butt of a spear to his ribs. Clara screamed as he fell, blood bright across his cheek. But even on his knees, he held the line between them and her. "She is mine to protect," he roared. "She is not yours to finish." They dragged him back toward the trees, his heels tearing tracks in the dirt. Even then, he shouted, "Clara, run." She ran to the ravine, to the cave hidden behind moss-slick stones, crawled inside, pressed her back to the cold rock, hands over her mouth to silence her sobs. Outside, shouts, then hooves, then silence. She waited. Minutes? An hour? Her knees throbbed from crouching. Her heart ached from fear. Then, slowly, she crept back to the clearing. "Tyan," she called softly. She found him slumped beside the fire pit. Blood dried at his temple. His chest rose, barely. She dropped beside him, shaking, brushing the hair from his face. His eyelids fluttered. The days that followed were a blur. Fear, sweat, desperate hope. His fever climbed. He muttered in broken words, called her name, then others she didn't know. She tried everything. Cool cloths, willow bark, crushed herbs. Nothing worked. On the 5th morning, hollow-eyed and sleepless, Clara packed a leather satchel, tied a knife to her waist, and left. She moved like a ghost with purpose, through thorns, across creeks, digging moss from stone, scraping bark with bloodied fingers. A snake hissed once near her feet. She didn't scream, didn't stop. She boiled what she'd found, spoon-fed him slowly, wiped his brow, and sang. Not loudly, just enough. "Stay with me," she whispered, holding his hand. "Please stay." At dawn his fever broke. His eyes opened, red-rimmed, tired but clear,